Welcome back. We are in AP English, and today we are again continuing with our conversations of Dante. This is the second of a series of lectures on Dante's Inferno. I recommend that you have your hymnal open. I've recommended to page 42. I've also recommended that you have your lecture notes now out in front of you, page 23. It just gives you some kind of sense of the trajectory of where we're moving. It is so difficult to lecture on this classic text and do justice to it, even if we're working at the epidermal level. Some of you will admit that of the poetry we've read thus far, this is probably some of the more complex poetry, but on some hand, it's actually fairly simple poetry as well. The topography of hell begins with some inscription information. I want to spend a few minutes now, as I forecasted last week, telling you we would get here, asking about and talking about the notion of afterlife. Eschatology is the word here. The idea of what happens after you die, and how Dante will construct a hell that is predicated on, of all things, love. Dante has a real challenge in terms of his theology, but he also has a challenge in terms of his humanity. Dante is a humanist. Now let's define that word. As a humanist, Dante is acutely aware of all classic literature. Okay? So in other words, he's read all of the classic texts, pre-Christian texts and the like. That is to say, Dante knows his Plato. I can just say that in kind of general way. Dante knows his Plato. He knows his Homer. Dante knows the classic texts. So on the one hand, Dante is going to want to, as a humanist, celebrate human freedom. Okay? On the one hand, celebrate human freedom. That is to say, human beings have a choice. If they make the right choice, then in their afterlife, certain things happen to them. If they make the wrong choice, then in their afterlife, other things happen to them. But wait a minute. The whole project of setting up the afterlife seems to some degree to kind of remove the notion of choice. Freedom. This is this question that oftentimes will be phrased as, are human beings free to do what they want to do, or are we rather more like puppets on a string that are somehow being controlled by fate or destiny or God, or in the case of Plato, passions, emotions, that kind of thing? How free are humans, and to what degree does Dante believe in human freedom? Well, that's one question. Another question is, how can you believe in hell and believe in God? That is to say, how can you believe that a loving God would allow people to have terrible things done to them in the afterlife? Notice on page 42 that Dante will tell us that hell has some inscriptions here. We are familiar with the famous one, abandon hope all ye who enter here, those lines saying above certain teachers' doors and the like. But notice that right above that, Dante will tell us what it is that constructed hell. Notice, sacred justice moved my architect. I was raised here by divine omnipotence, primordial, there's the word, love, and ultimate intelligence. In other words, Dante describes, he constructs, a hell created by an all-powerful but also all-loving deity. Now this sits, of course, at the heart of not only Christian theology and the debate of Christian theology, but also the very project of humanism itself. To what degree can human beings claim that they actually have some kind of free will or choice, or sometimes the theological language here is agency? And to what degree then is a hell and the construction, the idea of a hell, going to be compatible with the idea of a loving God? Now, the easiest way to talk about this is to talk about a parent who is disciplining his or her child and saying, I'm doing this for your own good because I love you. That is to say, this hurts me more than it does you. Let's talk about hell for a few moments. And the notion of hell. And the idea that after you die, certain things happen to you. Dante is not unfamiliar with Republic 10. Wait a minute, what do I mean by Republic 10? What happens in Republic 10? We call it the myth of, does anyone remember? The myth of who? No, Gyges happens early in Republic. This is the very end of Republic. Do you remember the chap's name? Has what's called, it's called the myth of has what's called a near-death experience. Now, I should point out to you that this question about what happens after your brainwaves cease and you actually quote-unquote die, that has become a very intriguing question in the 20th century. Here's why. There were a couple of researchers who discovered that lots and lots of people were having near-death experiences and were talking about them. So, for example, there they are after the car wreck, and they're lying there, for example, in the emergency room, and they will report after the fact, because they don't die, the strangest thing happened to me when I was flatlining. I actually found myself watching the doctors do their work on my body. I was actually outside of my body. And I was kind of hovering above in the top of the ceiling there, watching these people do this. And then all of a sudden, I was right back there again inside of my body. Or they will often report that there's these tunnels and there's these lights that are involved. Well, these researchers decided we've heard enough of this. Let's start to interview. And they call their book Life After Life. It became a very controversial book, but a very popular book. Lots and lots of people reading this, suggesting that after you die, there's something that happens to you, and it seems to involve some kind of a journey of sorts. Let's talk eschatology for a moment. Generally speaking, there's three answers to the question, what happens after we die? Answer one is really not an answer. It's more of a non-answer. It says, well, in the end, whatever it is that you are, atoms in the void, some kind of, walking dirt or whatever it is that you are, once you die, that's it, you die. There isn't anything that happens to you afterwards. There is no such thing as afterlife. Whatever it is that we call this thing existence now, that's all that there is. And there's absolutely no scientific evidence for anything after that. As I say, it's kind of a non-answer. If you are going to postulate, however, that something that is you continues to exist after your death, when your brain flatlines, of that view, there's generally speaking two large views. One is what we call a linear view. That view says that you live, you die, and then upon your death, whatever it is that happens afterwards is kind of final. That is to say, there's some kind of reward or punishment, some kind of heaven and hell, some kind of an idea of a region where the soul will go, but the body does not go. And that's it. It's a one-ticket ride, if you will, for existence. And then something happens afterwards. After death comes the judgment, is the way one theological text renders it. Okay? That's one view. The second view of eschatology is the cyclical view. And it says something like this. There's two of you. There's a body, there's a spirited part of you, some kind of energy that is metaphysical, beyond the physical. We can call it soul, to follow Plato's Phaedo, that famous dialogue of Plato that tells the story of Socrates right before he dies. Right before he drinks the hemlock, we're told that Socrates sits in his prison cell. The hemlock sits in a cup right next to him on a table. And all of the disciples of Socrates, including Plato, are there, and they're all crying and weeping. They're sad. Socrates is laughing and telling jokes, and they don't understand. Why are you so happy? Dude, you're about to drink hemlock and die. That leads to a conversation about the soul. And the most famous philosophic instantiation of the soul is found in this classic dialogue, Phaedo, where Socrates argues for the second view, a cyclical view. It is a view that says the soul goes away from the body for a while, but then it reincarnates. That is to say, it returns. It comes back. Now, of course, if you're familiar with Plato's Book 10 of Republic, you know that we have the same story all over again. The idea is that the soul goes away for a while and then it comes back. It reanimates. And there's different versions of this. Sometimes this is called transmigration of the soul, transmigratory view. And this is all, eschatologically speaking, a cyclical view. It says, look, this thing you call living and dying, you've done it millions and millions and millions of times before. Just over and over and over again. So living and dying is not that big of a deal because your soul comes back again and again and again. This will explain why sometimes we have this what will be called deja vu moment, where you have the sense that you've been involved in something before, you've been doing something, but you know you could not have possibly ever done this before. This idea that you're recollecting or remembering something. Now, the way the Greeks play that game is that you drink from a special river in the underworld called the river Lethe. And this river Lethe removes your memory of your prior life. However, sometimes your prior life or lives can be remembered just briefly, and that's this deja vu moment, okay? Now, the Greeks decide to put all of the souls of the underworld in Hades. And they picture this Hades place, this region, under the ground, okay? The Greeks don't have any idea of heaven, other than to call it Mount Olympus, where the gods all live. But no humans live there. For the Greeks, everyone goes to Hades. Hades is not hell. With the exception of people like Sisyphus and Tantalus and a few others who get punished in Hades, Hades is not hell in the way that Dante will think of hell. Dante will have a linear view of eschatology. After you die, you go to one of three places, not two. There's a middle ground, purgatory, that for Dante and for Roman Catholics will kind of explain why you cannot be in hell but not be in heaven. It's a middle ground. But for Dante and for our discussion today now, we're interested in this notion of going to hell. If you die, you go to hell, where there is a final judgment, right? And then you are placed in one of the 9 circles of hell, where, depending on what it is that you've done, you will have a certain kind of punishment done to you. But notice what's interesting for Dante, and it's a giveaway right away that he's writing allegory. Dante pictures bodies in hell. So, for example, you're an individual who dies in a car wreck where the car burns up. That is to say, your body burns up, and yet when you die, you go to Dante's hell. You're there with your body all over again. So, for example, if you're a suicide for Dante, you are punished in a physical way in hell. Now, why do you think Dante did this? Why would he need to picture bodies being punished in hell? You see literal hands and feet being torn apart if you're the suicide, for example. Why would he do that? There's lots of excruciating, painful things happening in hell to the body. Hooks being put in the body, and some of you are saying some of the allusions to the really gory kinds of films we're familiar with now, these Saw films and all of this kinds of things where tortures happen. Dante in many ways kind of invents that idea. Before Dante, by the way, we don't have real clear pictures of that, what happens in the afterlife. Why do you think he does this with the body?
It's like a way to cope with his exile because he can't like actually go out and do this to all these people. So it's like a way of like...
Dante can inflict greater pain on a body than just inflicting pain on a spirit. True. Now we're going to make a distinction between two kinds of pain in Dante's hell. Pain that's done that's physical pain, having hooks jabbed into you, being forced under a river of poop that you have to try and breathe, and you're swallowing yucky poop and all that. Okay, all of that kind of stuff. Pushing around large rocks, having a weighted coat on you, things like this. Whirling around in the air constantly with things stinging you or whatever. That's all physical pain. But then Dante also has psychological pain or mental pain as a part of his hell. Can you think of an example of psychological or mental pain that happens in Dante's hell?
Walking backwards?
Yes, walking backwards. Now you could argue that's kind of a physical pain, but it's far more of a psychological pain. What is the walking backwards a punishment for?
Because they were fortune tellers and magicians.
Right, individuals who tried to see the future and make money, we should point out, off of that seeing of the future. Dante has real problems with people who use their skill sets to try to make money and the like, you see, inappropriately. Usury and that kind of thing is all going to be seen as really bad for Dante. And so in their afterlife, in their punishment, they have more of a psychological, and of course one of the more powerful images the tears, because the head is turned around backwards, the tears run off of the face and down through the cleft of the buttocks is the translation. It is a kind of grotesque and sad type of rendering. Now, let's get to this question. What's Dante up to? Is Dante trying to scare the hell out of us? Let's say it again for your notes. Is Dante trying to scare the hell out of us? We, of course, use that phrase sometimes. Oh, you scared the hell out of me, when we say I'm really scared. But that's not the question that I'm asking. I'm asking a different question. I'm asking an academic or an intellectual question. Is Dante's project to say, don't commit adultery, because if you do, this terrible thing happens to you? Don't commit suicide, because if you do, this terrible thing happens to you? Is hell a propedeutic for moral behavior? A colleague of mine reported several years ago to me, she is a practicing theologian, that she can remember vividly at 6 years old going to a summer vacation Bible school, brought into the basement where she and a whole group of young children were set down on she remembered the color of the carpet, the smell of the room, everything. And then they hit a little button on the VHS player and said, if you are bad, little boys and little girls, this is what will happen to you. Someone in that religious group was a fireman and had somehow found a video showing a person burned alive.
Wow.
They hit the play button for this group of people, these group of children, and those children watched someone rolling around on the ground, burning to death, screaming. She will tell this story to me many, many years later. She was beyond the age of 40, and she said, I can remember vividly everything about that moment, where I was sitting, the room, the smell of the room, all of my senses were very acute at that moment. They let this go on for what she said seemed like an eternity, no Dante pun intended, and then hit the stop button and again said it, now you better be good little boys and girls, or this is what will happen to you. By the way, question, do you think that the threat of hell, does it work as a moral propedeutic? In other words, if you want people to behave morally a certain way, you threaten them with hell or some kind of punishment, or you promise some kind of a reward for them in their afterlife. Notice how this question takes us back to the myth of Gyges / the myth of Maverick and our discussion of Plato's Republic of a few weeks ago. How many of you think that the threat of hell actually works? In other words, I am going to pick the money up off of the floor at the Maverick when it drops $5,000. Yes, right before Christmas, I could certainly use that. And then all of a sudden a little thought goes through your head of Dante's Inferno. And you go, oh yeah, yikes. That is a bad one. I don't want that to happen to me. Oh lady, you dropped your money. Does it work? Can you scare the hell out of people? Does it work? What do you think, Schreiber? Does it work? Can you actually use hell as a threat to make people behave morally appropriately?
It can be used, but...
It can. In what instances does it work? What's the key for it to work?
The person has to be really afraid.
Oh, let's point this out. This is crucial, isn't it? The individual must really believe. Correct?
And both the reward and the punishment.
You gotta believe for it to work. The moment the individual goes, oh yeah, hell, that's right. That's kind of like that joke that you're, right? It's kind of like Santa Claus in Christmas time. It only works if you really believe in it. Question, do you think this is what Dante's doing? Is Dante trying to construct an afterlife that is so horrifying that individuals will say upon reading it, ooh, I want to be a good person, not a bad person, because I do not want to go to that place Dante has constructed? Do you think that's what he's doing? And is that why it's so graphic in its description of the punishments? Is that what Dante's doing?
I don't know, because the thief one, where the snakes bite him and they switch into snakes, to be honest, the first time that happened to me, I don't even think I'd be that mad. like, that's kind of cool, I just turned into a snake.
Oh, let's point out something that Mr. Schreiber's pointed out that's really important about any punishment. Can we say this? Any punishment.
Yes.
If it's eternal, that means it's going to happen over and over and over. At some point, no matter how terrible it is, right? There is some sense that it's going to be like predictable. Right? Oh, this is happening to me again. What do you think? Is Dante about trying to scare the hell out of people?
I don't think so.
Why not?
I think it's more of maybe making fun of the whole concept.
In what way?
Like, I think he's making it such an extreme where it's not believable.
It is an extreme representation of an afterlife and punishment. For example, we can make this argument from Ms. Kennedy's position, and it's been held by many scholars, that Dante is in fact trying to write ironically about the afterlife. That is to say, there isn't a lot of information in the religious texts, the Bible, the Quran, and elsewhere, that really give us much detail about this place called hell. It's a place you don't want to be, but beyond that, you don't get a lot of real graphic detail. Dante gives us that graphic detail, but he does it in such an absurd or extreme way that it leads readers to go, yeah, that's one view. It's an interesting question. Could you invent a worse hell than Dante's in terms of punishments?
Yeah.
Could you make up worse physical punishments? And see, and some of you will say, oh, you're right, that is these Saw movies. That is any movie where a human being tries to torture another human being with some kind of torture. We're always back to Dante. In other words, whatever you can do, Dante, I can one-up you. I can come up with something more extreme. Why do those movies? There's a brand new one that's just about to come out about a house where all these terrible things have happened in the form of tortures to people. Why are these films so popular? And why is Dante's Inferno 10-1 more read than Purgatory and Paradise of the Divine Comedy? What is it for us about humans that somehow seem to kind of get off on other people in pain? Why?
Because it's not happening to them.
Help me to understand what that means. It's not happening to me, so I'm going to watch it or read about it. It's happening to somebody else, though. Why is that attractive to us?
I guess that means that humans like watching other people suffer.
Humans like watching other humans suffer. As long as it's not me and it's you getting jacked.
Well, I guess it depends on who it is. Like, if it was like your mom that it was happening to, you probably wouldn't like to watch it. But if it was like the person,
Depending on whether you're mad at her or not.
I don't know if it's real.
It brings into question the reality. Of course, when you're watching it as a production from Hollywood, you know that it is.
Fake.
Yeah. So it can allow you to kind of experience, right, the screaming and all of that, but somewhere in the back of your psyche you're able to go, yeah, but it's not real.
Well,
Can you do the same thing reading Dante's Inferno?
You don't know.
It's attractive because you can say, yeah, but it's not real.
But see, and I think that's why they, one of the reasons why they refused to make a movie about Dante's Inferno is because we don't know what happened after we die. We don't know if we're going to go to hell. We don't
It's
know
an
what the hell's going
uncertainty.
to be like. So,
Is it really then more about, well, we read the word on page 42, justice. Let's go there now, and let's talk about hell as Dante's attempt at justice. He is thrown out of Florence. He is exiled for life, and that really does upset him. As I suppose it would upset you as well if you were told that you, for example, could never ever again do this or that. You know what I mean? The very fact that you're told you can't do it would forever make it torture for you. Even if it's not something you necessarily would really want to do, being told you can't do it makes you immediately lament, sad. So Dante's stuck in terrible exile, never allowing to go back to the city he loves. And from that exile, he constructs the Divine Comedy, of which Inferno is only one of the three parts, where individuals end up for what reason? Is it for what they've done or for what they haven't done? I'll ask this question again for your notes. Do you end up in Dante's hell for what you've done or for what you haven't done? Is it a sin of commission or a sin of omission? Is it for what you have done, sleeping with another man's wife, killing another person, lying, betraying, whatever it is, suicide? Or is it for what you haven't done, being sorry or repentant? This is the essence of Dante's justice, and this is why Dante can say hell is constructed by a loving deity. This is Dante's answer to the theodicy question. You'll remember the theodicy question, that triangle on the whiteboard. On one corner we have an all-loving or all-loving God or gods. On the other corner we have an all-powerful God or gods. And then on the third corner, remember, we have bad stuff, evil, sin, etc. How can you explain the fact that terrible things happen in a world constructed by an all-powerful, all-loving deity? Dante's answer is an interesting one, and it's a very modern answer for his time. It is simply freedom. It is justice by virtue of freedom. Human beings have the right to choose to behave the way they wish. If they behave immorally, they have the right to feel sorry for that. What's the word we use? Repent. If they choose not to repent, humans live in hell. Now, after Dante, this debate about whether hell is a real place or a state of mind will become an ongoing debate. We will see it when we study Shakespeare's Hamlet. Hamlet will say, in fact, that there is this interesting debate about whether I should do A or do B. And in moments I feel as if I'm in hell. Later into the 20th century, the great existentialist writer Jean-Paul Sartre, S-A-R-T-E, will write a little play called No Exit, where he will imagine an afterlife, but it's not anything like what Dante pictures as a place of torture, but rather it's a place of choice still. To that degree, Sartre's afterlife looks a lot like the world we live in right now. That is to say, put one guy with two women in a single room. Make the room nice, Victorian-style living room. And a door that leads to a hallway that's dark and long, going in both directions, and leave the door unlocked, so that individuals can determine whether they want to leave this room in the comfort of this room once they've decided, oh yeah, I'm dead and now I'm back alive again. That is to say, they realize they've lived their life. How should they behave? Sartre will say in that famous existentialist moment, hell is other people. Now this view is an extrapolation of Dante's view. That is to say, Dante's not writing about an afterlife. He's writing about what Florence looks like during Dante's life. That is to say, this is where terrible people do terrible things to one another. And human beings have choices. In other words, we kind of work off of this assumption that you live, you die, and then there's this thing called hell. Dante asks a more intriguing question. What if you've already lived? And what if you've already died? And what if this, right now, is your afterlife? This is it. This thing you call your life is actually not your life. It's your afterlife. You've already lived your life. Now you get to pay for it by living this thing called your life. This is your hell. Welcome to room 303, Worland, Wyoming. Welcome to hell. Or rather, is Dante saying, hell is what you choose to make of it. Shakespeare will say as much in Hamlet. We choose in our minds to decide whether we get to make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. The influences of Dante are prodigious, not only to Shakespeare, but also to Milton. Milton will write Paradise Lost. He'll play a very similar game, asking a very similar question. What is hell if it is not a state of mind? In other words, this view says you don't go to hell, but rather through hell. Notice Dante. He goes through hell. He gets out on the other side. He is fundamentally a different person by the end of that part of his journey. It has changed him. At a pivotal moment at the end, remember, he's so tired, he's so fatigued, he's given up and he just sits down. That's when Virgil will say to him, of course, ironically, Dante is the one writing these words, as if he's writing them to himself, "Up on your feet, this is no time to tire." In other words, it's not enough, it's not enough. You haven't gone through enough hell. Notice how allegorically this poem starts to read rather differently. Once you play the game of not seeing hell as a physical place, but rather as a psychological or a mental construction. In other words, you can go through terrible, terrible things, but if you have some kind of expectation of getting through them, you can continue. Up on your feet, this is no time to tire. Fame must be awakened over and over and over. The likelihood in a long life is that you grow tired. Hamlet will say, wearied. And it's at that moment, Dante seems to suggest, you are in hell. But you're only going through hell, not to hell. That is to say, up on your feet, unless you choose to stay there. That is to say, Dante writes a vision of the afterlife where you could actually choose to be in hell and stay there. That's the whole point of Virgil's line, up on your feet. This is no time to tire. You don't want to stay here. You got to get up and keep going. Initially, Dante's ready to say, no, I've done enough. I'm just going to stay here. You're going to stay in hell? That means you choose to stay in hell. And notice how Dante has solved the problem of freedom. You are as free as you allow yourself to be. You are as free as you choose to be. Notice as well, Dante's far more interested in the after effect of action than action itself. We have that famous saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Dante's not so much interested in intentions as he is in how you respond after you act in certain ways. How do you respond after you've done something inappropriate? For Dante, if you choose to not repent, to be sorry, to not admit the learning experience, then you are in hell forever. Why forever? Because notice, all of Dante's inhabitants of hell refuse to admit the potentiality of their error. About any negative act, they ask, why did this happen to me? Dante points out, the moment that you change the preposition to for, why did this happen for me? You are no longer in hell. You are going through hell. Dante is able to come through on the other side. Notice that this is a Divine Comedy, is an attempt by Dante to answer the question, why did exile happen for me? Not to me. Notice he begins writing Divine Comedy, why did this happen to me? It's a legitimate question. If somebody were to come into your house, burn it down, and throw you out of your house and tell you could never come back to your home and your town, your immediate question would be, why did that happen to me? Dante will begin there. But by the end of Inferno, he's already ready to ask, why did this happen for me? Up on your feet. This is no time to tire. The journey through hell has been a propedeutic. That's what Virgil tells Dante. You're learning something. What are you learning? Up on your feet. This is no time to tire. You've got to keep going. Now this idea